as an introduction, welcome back. This is session 5. Now I'm having. All right, so last session that we had covered jury chair. Currently, there's 3 of the sessions are on the website. The 4th one will be probably on in the next day or so, and we'll get this one done as quick as we can. I do appreciate the patience of the people that have been sending me emails saying, I keep looking for session 4 and it's not there. If I don't get back to you, it's just because I'm inundated with emails saying it's not there. So I apologise for that. But again, another very successful session 4. And for those who haven't looked for the YouTube, it's on the APF website. I will send a link as soon as each one's on, so you can just go straight to it. But it's under, as you can see, it's under Support Services Training. And then you'll get a page like this that'll have each of the sessions on. And they are getting viewed a few times, so I really appreciate that. So this session's going to be split in 2 sections where Bernie Beston's going to do the jury assessor's role, and then I'm going to take over and run through the secretary's PowerPoint template that we've created. Just a bit of a reminder that there is a FIAP virtual that's been run in Bangladesh. Currently I'm the commissioner. I'm looking for exhibits. It is a FIAP show and goes towards your judges accreditation. And just for Dave Collier and all the aero people, we've got aero philately class now added to it. So it was just an oversight to not have it in the prospectus. It's now been corrected. So this session, again, broken up into 2 areas, jury assessor, which Bernie will take on very shortly. And then once we've finished with him, we'll have a few questions, and then I'll take over for the second half. So just give me a second. So on behalf of the session, I'd like to introduce Bernie Beston to do the role of the assessor. Thank you, Bernie.
Thanks, Glenn. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's session. Forgive me for the colours. I had a better colour run with various roles, but it seemed to play up as American software does. So you're stuck with lime green and pretty green, but that is an Australian colour, so you shouldn't be too upset. Sorry, New Zealand, I didn't put anything in there. But my nephew got an award yesterday for assisting the rollout of the Codev vaccine in New Zealand. So we're helping you across the ditch, that's for sure. Tonight applies to Australians, and those of you who've been through the assessment will probably remember some of it. For New Zealanders, traditionally when they've been on Australian juries, they've been able to be assessed, but it's been an optional issue, it's not compulsory. Whereas for Australian jurors, assessment, when we have an assessor, is compulsory.
I can't hear what Bernie's saying.
A little bit about myself. I'm a retired barrister and solicitor, been actively collecting since I was 14. I entered my first national in 1984, which was St George in Sydney, and I attended and exhibited in 1980 in London, first international. I had 2 frames in Queensland. Former president of the APF, director of FIP in 2010 in Portugal. In 2014, I was elected vice president, and in Bangkok in 2018, I became the president, of which position I currently hold. That picture on the left is when I was in London in 1980, one of those street side sketch and pens. I think maybe I look better now than I did then, but that's a matter of opinion. Jury selection. There's a little bit of a background. How do we select juries in Australia? Well, they invite interested exhibitors and attend training courses. before being allocated to a national exhibition as an apprentice. Generally, only full exhibitions have apprentices. There will be exceptions from time to time. And the reason for that, of course, is that if you're going to be an apprentice, you really need a broad range of exhibits and as big a jury and biggest number of exhibits as possible, so that you get a wider selection of interests, which you do not get when you have a half national or a very limited national. Juries for Australian exhibitions are nominated by the organising committee and approved by the APF. Now, of course, each state must be represented, but again, that can be fluid at times, depends on availability and the classes. Australia has the same problem that they have in worldwide philately. You need so many jurors for different classes, and often you have more jurors for the class that you have lots of exhibits in than you need. Sometimes it does require that some jurors get more jobs than others simply because of the selection criteria and the exhibits that need to be judged. Why assess jurors? Well, there's a reason behind this, and we started assessing jurors a long time ago. Why? Because we wanted to assist jurors to understand their strengths and weaknesses. Not a SWOT analysis as they used to do, but it's the same system. The jurors acknowledge their level of competence and to aid jurors to increase their level of competence by self-assessment. How is the competence of Australian jurors?
Increase the sound.
We started assessing jurors because at the APF many years ago, we found that the appointment of jurors was somewhat ad hoc, and you would get a jury where some jurors clearly weren't up to the standard that was required. There was no basis of how to improve them or how to assess them. And to have them consider how they're doing and how they're not doing. Now, we're no different from many other countries, and we've seen this lately in countries like Bangladesh, where because they don't have any jurors, how do you start setting up jury training and jurors? Because you've got to start somewhere, and that's one of the problems worldwide. But in countries where you either don't have current competent jurors, or you have a few, but they don't want new bodies because then they'll lose jobs. So there's actually no training. There's no encouragement for new jurors. It's sad, but that's what happens. Australia considered that it should be better to have a structured approach. And that's why we started doing jury training many years ago, starting with people having courses, people who wanted to be jurors. The assessment process is in fact an extension of that, to assess those who get there, and again to have more discussions about why they're doing, how they're doing, and you'll see that as we come through the form. Click. So hence the jury assessment process was begun and a jury assessor position was created. Now originally it was just one person. We quickly discovered it actually needed two people because we're all human, we all have different personalities. So when we're doing an assessment, it's better to have two involved in the process and not one. One will complement the other. The process you'll see here has in fact been adopted by me and FIP to assess apprentice jurors when they're assessed. And there we have two assessors for a totally different reason. The reason we have two assessors internationally is we discovered 1 year, probably about 8 years ago, that some of the jurors were not very competent in English, but they were competent in Spanish or in French. So we therefore always had a juror that at least had one other language who would assist in the assessment. Now, at the completion of judging, each juror is assessed against the criteria by two assessors, and you'll see in the listing where that is. They've generally been senior Australian jurors, and to date, and I'm pretty sure that the list is correct, been myself, Ed Roos, Michael Blake, Malcolm Groom, and Gary Brown. The last assessment was in Canberra on the 18th of March 2018 when Gary and I did the assessment. And we've found, of course, over the years that the more of these we've done, I think the better we get at them. But in addition, Canberra was the one because it's the most recent and quite memorable in my mind. Those who are doing the assessment quickly perceive who are the better jurors with better judgment and less bias. It becomes very obvious. We hope when we've done that, that those that aren't that good will also learn by that process. The original format was created by myself and Ed Bruce. I have amended it from time to time to meet perceived needs as we made assessments. It's like anything else, once you start, there are aspects you haven't thought about. They come to light when you proceed with the process, so you're making adjustments. I don't know of any other country that has this system. But the system that I know are using the FIP was taken by from the Australian template and I've readjusted it. System is a face-to-face debate based on a series of questions. The system assesses knowledge and judgment skills. It's a bit like a very smart doctor or a top surgeon. He doesn't necessarily make a good teacher. So the best PhDs at uni aren't always teachers. I found when I was at university that the professors were in fact the dumbest of the lecturers. The smart ones were those who didn't have high degrees or honours, etc. They were smart, they couldn't deliver the knowledge to anybody else. So it's a lot of difference between exhibitors and jurors. And these are the questions we ask. We start with importance, which doesn't have the problematical aspect it did 20 years ago when it was first introduced. We ask a juror, how do they assess importance? We don't tell them how to do it. We ask them, why do you do it? How do you do it? We then ask them how to describe the difference between classic and modern, between traditional and total history. Now, when we say between classic and modern, that's perhaps a little bit old-fashioned, but not entirely. We did find many years ago that many jurors gave more importance to anything that was prior to 1890 than to modern. And there's no balance, no basis for that. So you have to ask them then, well, why do you do that? You have to explain they can't do that, that it's all got to be the same. And then to describe the difference between traditional and total stationary. Now, if they can't answer that, it means they haven't been reading their regulations and their guidelines, because you have to have a look at those and then you understand there is a difference. And then you ask them about treatment importance in thematics. And of course, unfortunately, everybody fell into a trap there because there is no importance in thematic judging. Now again, what it does is says that you need to know, every juror needs to know the difference in the classes. Because when you get to saying is everything, or these exhibits that have been assessed as gold or larger than they approved, you need to be able to understand how they got to those points. And if you don't, you really can't go on proving. So there's it's to make the juror think, how does he assess importance? Now, I could have spent 3 hours on importance, so it's not the subject here tonight. But you'll see here the purpose is to have the juror start to think, how are they judging, how are they thinking? And we'd hope they'd run off home afterwards and start researching it again. We ask about presentation. Now, all of you know that the first thing we all do is look at presentation. only 5 points. But we also know that there are many exhibitors who generally achieve higher awards than they should have because their presentation was so good. And it certainly beguiles you. I used to explain that, you know, a beautiful woman in a cloth sack looks good, but in good clothes, she'll look even better. The other question we say, and this comes from experience, out of 15 exhibits, how many would you allocate 3 points? Ironically, most people actually say, well, out of 15, probably no more than 3. So they come out pretty good. But I've had jurors who say, oh, that the, you know, all the stamps weren't along the same bottom line and crap like that. That has nothing to do with presentation. So we have to be very careful that jurors know what they're doing. But how did that question come to light? It came to light in an international exhibition where, as I generally do, I was checking to see that the Aussies all had a fair shake. So I went to the youth judge team leader and I said, why did you give Johnny Smith? And he showed me the marks and he had 3 presentations. I said, that's pretty rough. Oh no, we gave them all 3. I said, what do you mean you gave them all 3? Oh, that's what we do where I come from. All the youth get 3 points. I said, but you can't do that in international. You couldn't even be doing it in a national show. But you see where he came from, they had a mindset that you don't give youth more than X number. And I've seen that in some other countries. I won't mention any names, but some of you might guess. And normally, generally speaking, most exhibits will get 4 or 5. Yes, going back 20 years, a lot of exhibits did get 3, but not anymore. But again, it's to make people think. The title page. What elements do you look for in a title page? And again, they have to start thinking, well, how do they? The problem I find with most title pages is they have nothing to do with the actual exhibit. It's all about the subject. And how the British were, you know, got there earlier and educated the natives and turned them into Christians and crap like that. It's not about the exhibit. So you've got to make them realise that's what it has to be. Treatment. Do you have a bottom line for this section? Again, we find that some exhibitors start at 0. Some exhibitors always start in the middle, and some start at the top and take points off. So we want to discuss with the exhibitor, how does he or she do it? And generally speaking, I would think you'd start in the middle unless it's particularly awful and horrible. And that's why we want to discuss how you get to that. Now, there's a valid reason for that. If you've got a team of 3 and each of those jurors is starting at a different base, you're going to have an awful lot of problem getting a balance. The other problem is you need to get treatment right. If you've got 3 guys all picking 25 and 2 guys picking 15, the guys picking the 15 will say, well, let's do an average. And of course, at the end of the day, the exhibitor suffers because he's not there for an average, he's there for a correct figure. If you're talking between 25 and 27, yes, you can average. But when you have 5 and 6 points separate, an average is not fair to the exhibitor. So keep that in mind. We ask questions. We ask them about the treatment. We ask them, how do they look at treatment? What do they look at? What do they ask about? And you get answers back. So there's no correct answer, except if they're going off the track. And then you try and put them back on the right track. You ask them about the team leader. How was he? And this has often become very interesting, particularly if you've got a bullying team leader. Because if you get a bullying team leader, you quickly find out that he's a bully. That means when you have your assessment of that team leader, you can ask him about how he does it, and you might be able to improve his performance. So it's all about making judges better. At the end of the day, that's better for exhibitors. Knowledge is another one. How do you assess the knowledge of an exhibit? How do you assess research? What do you regard as research in an exhibit? Condition. What points do you usually allocate? And here again, you have to be very careful. If I've got a modern exhibit, condition should virtually be almost the full marks because everything's perfect. If it's not, of course, you downgrade it. But it also says that if you're judging a classic exhibit, don't penalise the exhibitor because it's not absolutely perfect, because it's not going to be after 150 years. There's going to be defects. So don't penalise him because he's selected an area where the standard is not the same as if it was printed 2 weeks ago. So they're the facts we look at. And how do you assess rarity? Now, this is a funny one. And I don't mean by laughing. We know that some jurors, especially in Asia, look at, as they call them, the key pieces. And if you have the 3 key pieces, you get 20 out of 20. That's their mindset. That's not right. Rarity is not, as we know, anything to do with money. But you ask them, how do they assess it? Particularly then you cross-relate that to the class they were in. And this is important when you do look at the rarity. And one of the questions I look at, again, I draw on my experience. I know a very, very lovely exhibit that's a thematic exhibit. And it's always scored exceptionally high. And when I say that, I mean 96 points. But I have big problems with it because whilst it's got high rarity, it has repetition. So it'll have 3 proofs of exactly the same. Look at all the rarity. So again, you ask the judge, what would you think in that case? In other words, you make them think about the rarity is not just because he's got the rare items. Is it relevant? Should he have them in there? The other thing is you can't have an exhibit in mind. You don't want to see misprints, unissued, whatever. You don't want to see rarity in every page, because if it is, you haven't got a balanced exhibit. But again, that's something you've got to discuss with an exhibitor, and that's the whole purpose, is to let them come out. And then they start thinking, and you'll hope they will become better jurors. We ask other questions. Now, we sometimes have had some good responses, sometimes we haven't. But how do you see room for improvement? Because we can always improve, no matter what. Would more jury training be beneficial? And most people say yes. Are you willing to travel at your own expense for this training? And almost everybody says yes, which is quite remarkable. Now, we never say where they're travelling. We're talking about Australia. We're not talking about anywhere else. But, you know, it's possible in the future we might do something like that, where we'll all fly to New Zealand or something for a weekend and have a training. So it's not that far-fetched. And the reason we ask that, of course, is to see whether they're fair income about training, because I think often debate in that we don't get enough time for it and it's beneficial. We ask other questions. How often do you exhibit? Now, Australia has a rule, as you all know, that you must exhibit in your judging class every 3 years. I think there's just been an extension of that because of COVID, and there haven't been the opportunities. I'd love to introduce that into the FIP, but I don't think I've got any chance at all because so many of our jurors have not exhibited for probably 20 years. And politically, I wouldn't get up. I'd just get skinned. So we asked them, though, how often do you exhibit? Now, my view is if you're not actively exhibiting, and I don't mean the same exhibit you formed in 1925, I mean the exhibit you've been working on the last 3 or 4 years, you're really not up to what's going on in the modern world. How many exhibits are you working on? Now, I'm not criticising anybody who's got 1 or 2 exhibits, but there is a reason for this. The more different classes you have exhibits in, the more knowledge you get, the more concepts you get, the more you know about. So it helps you in your exhibiting. Now, some of us, friends who collect Latin America, will know that some of the printers for one country were also the printers in another country. So you end up with more knowledge about another area that you would never know about unless you'd been looking at those areas. And I think that's important because when you go to judge, you don't get just judge as we know your own area, you judge all areas. So the more working knowledge you have of other areas, the better. Now, a team leader, before he goes to an exhibition, should be allocating who's going to be, as the Americans call it, the first responder for the critique. And again, therefore, the more exhibitors, the more jurors we have who have knowledge of different areas, the better it is for an exhibitor. We asked them about the one frame regulations. And unfortunately, a lot of exhibitors are not familiar with the one frame regulations. We often see in one frame exhibitions, probably 20%, if not more, of exhibits who are not suitable for one frame. They're exhibits that come out of a major exhibition. In some cases, they're just plucked out of a frame. They're just one frame out of 8. But there are many others when they're not one frame out of 8. They've been prepared specifically, but it's an area or a section, take Postal Stationery, where it's an 8-frame exhibit. It's not a 1-frame exhibit. Now, if you see an exhibit of Postal Stationery of one particular card, that's a different story. That's a study of a card that you'd never be able to squeeze into 8 frames. So these are the aspects that you need to look at when you're judging 1-frame exhibits. And now that we're having 1-frame exhibitions, it's probably not as important in a major national because we might not have room for 1 frame. They're all going into 1-frame exhibitions. But again, this is an opportunity to have jurors consider, do they really know those? Do they really read them? And are they exhibiting in 1 frame? And are they doing the right thing, or are they misleading the jurors themselves? That tries to give us a fairly rounded assessment. We don't make any judgment on a juror, but we do try and mentor them into improving. The process gives an insight to the juror whether he is or is not up to speed. I remember one juror decided at the end of the discussion that he didn't want to judge anymore because he didn't think he was good enough. He was probably right, but I'm just saying this is what can happen. Or he's not providing adequate assessment in his judging. I mean, sometimes some jurors just do things by rote. They were not taught to judge properly. They were just taught the percentage rule. And I've had people do this. Oh, you can't give him 22 points. That's only 72%. Well, that's totally irrelevant. You don't do percentage judging, but that's not fair to the exhibitor. But again, that's where the discussion process comes in. So the process helps the juror consider, self-assess how he is performing. Reflective question. We asked the juror to provide the names of the exhibitions, entries, and classes he's going to enter. Let's assume we're doing it this month in 21-22. One, because we get an idea that he just said what he's doing. Now we're asking what is he actually doing. And if he isn't doing anything, he might start thinking about it. We ask him how many national, international, FIAT, BIP, other exhibitions have you attended in the last 3 years, other than as a commissioner, juror, exhibitor, visitor. We don't want jurors to be to be judging just because they got a free trip. We want them to be attending exhibitions when they're not paid for. They've got to take it out of their own pocket. I personally like exhibitors and jurors to be attending exhibitions other than FIP, FIAP, perhaps one in the United States, it's an IO, one in somewhere else that isn't a FIAP, a national somewhere, anywhere, even Serbia or Siberia, because they'll get a new insight and that will help them in their judging. Now we come to question time, and all of you know I'm as deaf as a badger, so I may not hear your questions. So if necessary, we'll get someone else to interpret it. People like Glenn Stafford, it must be a Western Australian thing. As you know, my father came from Western Australia. I always speak up very clearly and loudly. So are there any questions before we move on? Well, that's good.
Oh, it sounds like you've covered everything. I know that this is not that much beneficial for New Zealand, but maybe it's something that they could consider down the track. And we've actually never had a New Zealander, a court judge, refuse the process, which I think has been very complimentary of what we're trying to achieve. Some do see value in it and others don't comment. So we're very happy with that. So before I go on with my section, is there any other questions for Bernie?
Just want to make a comment.
I think it's Dingle's hand, but I'm not quite sure.
We had a jury assessment in 2019 in Sydney, which Mr. Stafford and Moore were a jury assessor. So Canberra 2018 wasn't the last one.
Yeah, I think that was the last one that Bernie was involved with. So
yeah.
That was in Canberra. We did it outside the Hellenic room. I think it certainly won't be happening next year in the Hellenic room. I know that.
Yeah.
One thing that I would like to say is the fact that we do appreciate the idea of having an assessment process. The big problem we have being just one state, if you like, we don't have the resources necessarily to have individual assessors. So we need to think about the structure of our jury and how we might utilise some of our senior members to do some of the assessment in a process that we can live with. And I just like the idea personally, and that's my own personal view.
Thanks, Bob. So for Perth 2023, that'll be a full national like Sydney was. We'll have a jury assessor there. So whichever the court judges come over from New Zealand, they're welcome to be involved with the process.
The other aspect, Glenn, I should raise is that when we do this assessment, the assessment there's no form sent off to the APF or anybody else. So it's probably one of the few opportunities that a juror has to discuss how he judges or how he doesn't in confidence. Whereas in a big room where you have these meetings, it's a bit like the American critique session, where in America they do the critique. It's a public critique, and the exhibitor can ask questions, or anybody can ask questions, and they answer. And often it's very hard to be constructive in a big audience, because you don't want to criticize anybody, but you want to help them, and sometimes that needs criticism. But in this case, so it's the same thing when you have a group of jurors together. The ones that need help probably won't ask a question. They'll remain silent because they don't want to feel like being fooled, or people might think they don't know enough, so they shut up. But we have got a one-on-one or two. I mean, I know Malcolm and I did one together in Perth. They come out of their shell and they ask questions, which has to help them, I think, in their future judging. So that's another aspect. There's a lot of aspects in it, and I don't take the credit. I think most of this has got to go back to Ed Drews, who may have thought it up, but I'm sure there was more than him and me around the table at the time. But I think it's been a good concept over the years, and we haven't had it at every national. It's only every few years we bring it out, and I think it's positive. I haven't been able to have it done anywhere else, but as I say, it's certainly in the FIP apprentice system, that's for sure now.
I didn't quite get the significance of one of the questions towards the end, which was about when was the last time you attended an exhibition other than a commissioner, juror, exhibitor, or visitor? I mean, I guess what was being got at is, are you going to exhibitions where you're not being paid to go as a commissioner or juror? But everyone, if you're not going like that, the only other options would be going as an exhibitor or a visitor. So I didn't quite get how that was being questioned.
Yeah, look, I'll answer for Bernie. I think that meant to be, or are you going as an exhibitor or visitor? You know, pretty much at your own cost. So what Bernie always sort of says to all of us during judges training, if you're not going to exhibitions and looking at them outside the jury room, you're not doing additional training. Now, you have a guy in New Zealand who's he's a fanatic about going to exhibitions, and he makes notes on every exhibit he sees, and he judges them outside the jury room to see how close he is to the mark. Now, I have to commend that. I don't say everyone has to do that, but I have to commend that guy. I mean, that's pretty hardcore study. But the fact that you're there, I always make the opportunity that if I know the exhibitor and I'm there, I ask them to walk me through their exhibit. And I think you learn a lot more from an exhibitor on their exhibit, you know, just having them explain it all than when you're in the jury room trying to work it out. So there is a lot of benefits to going to exhibits that you're not judging, that you can pick up A, as an exhibitor, and B, as a juror as well. So
yes.
Yep, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yep, sure can, Linda.
I don't know, probably everybody knows this, but the current One Frame exhibition, they've got all of the exhibits online, so you can go in and look at all of the exhibits. And I thought that was really good to go and see, you know, all the classes, go and have a look. So people, Bernie's saying we should look at other exhibits to build up our knowledge. And there is a good example of people would like to take advantage of it. So
yeah. I think that's a very good point, Linda. Throughout COVID, a lot of exhibits have gone virtual around the world. So there's always opportunities to look at different type of exhibits that we don't normally see in Australia and New Zealand. And I think that's very beneficial too.
We'll be glad when it's over.
Well, look, I think the fellowship
I can't shout you a beer while the bloody COVID's on. I can't send it through this useless internet, you know?
Yeah, but I mean the fellowship of philately is just as important as everything else that we do. All right, I'm going to move on to the next half of this, which is it's basically a template that's been put together for secretaries. Now, I'm not saying that it's mandatory that a show secretary needs to use PowerPoint presentation, but I started seeing them being used. Malcolm Groom was one of the first proponents that I've seen. When I started going over to Europe and in Asia, I saw more and more people using this. Some people still use butcher paper to note things or just print things out. But I think this is twofold for us to go through here. Here you have a template that you can use yourself. It's going to go online. There's no proprietary information. But as we run through it reasonably quickly, it'll cement in mind the actual format of the shows that we run as well. And I think I like the twofold. Please consider using it. Of course, to start any jury, you normally have a welcome. And I've put in here, see show logo here. And you've got to remember the organising committee has spent a lot of time, generally 2 years in the lead up to the show. And one of the things they invest in is a show logo. And I think we need to do the organising committee justice by using that logo where is possible. So we'll use it on the feedback forms, we'll use it in the Palmaris document, and if you've got a PowerPoint presentation for running the show, then we should use it there. So this is just to start off, introducing everyone to the show. And you can see a little comment down there that if this is up before, as everyone's coming in, they're not just waiting around with their arms folded saying, what are we about to do? It says, you know, please introduce yourself to team members. Now, while we know most of each other in Australia and New Zealand, there's always people that I know the name, but I don't actually know personally, and I make the opportunity to go off and say good day to that person. And because the favourite thing that we have is once you start in the jury, there's a roll call, and we want to run things very professionally, so you need to be on time. And there's always the joke that for those that don't turn up on time, drinks for the Presidium. I have seen a few people late, and I have seen them buy the drinks at the bar. So while I think it's humorous, it's often deadly serious. So make sure you rock up for a roll call. Now, you want to introduce the Presidium. If you're going to have a Presidium, I think you need to do that right up front. I know a case where David Figg and myself were jury chair and secretary for Adelaide, and we pretty much said, look, we're going to be the Presidium. So if you can't, you know, if you've got an issue, we're the ones that will make the final determination. So at least everyone's aware. We don't just throw in 3 or 4 names later on and say, these are the guys that are going to sort things out. Of course, I think, as I said before, the organising committee have spent a lot of time. This is the one time that I would invite the head of the organising committee in to welcome the jury, because you know, they've worked a lot of tireless hours. They've brought the money in. They've paid our airfares, the hotel accommodation and meals for us to judge. And I think you need to give that organising committee a chance to just get 5 minutes out to say, look, what a great team I've got. We appreciate you all being here. These are the guys that help, etc., whatever they're going to do. So I'd always encourage that you invite it in. And then once they've done their introduction and everything, then they need to leave the jury room before anything else gets said. And then you have the welcome by the president or the chairman. That's the one of the jobs of the chair is to welcome everybody and set the pace of the actual. If you've got an honorary president like Bernie Beston, then you might have that. Now, this is typically a FIAP and FIP thing. We don't generally have honorary anything because organising committees can't afford them. So you might be honorary, but you'll be working as well. You'll probably be a juror, or you'll be putting up exhibitions in the frames. You'll do something. So if there is a consultant for the show and they might want to make remarks, these aren't all mandatory. These are just things that can happen, and these would be done at the beginning of the jury. If you have additional vice presidents, if you've got additional secretaries, you have assistant secretaries and people supporting that, everyone needs to be aware of who they are, because they might try to hoik them out because they're actually not jurors. So please don't do that to the assistant secretaries. And then I think you need to set the pace and say, look, here's our goals. We're going to start on this day. We're going to get into judging. I want everything done by the next day. I want all the final reviews done. Really set the pace up front. Don't let it drag on and then, you know, 4 hours before the end of the show, you think, oh, we better hurry up and get everything done. I think you need to get the jury right on task about driving them for the goals. Then I would put the first day schedule and the second day schedule up so people are aware what's happening, because normally on the first day schedule there could be an opening address or an opening ceremony. The second day typically we're going to have photographs, so we want everybody to wear their suit and tie. They can bring their gym shoes in afterwards and change after the photographs, but typically that's when those photographs are taken. I also talk about the opening hours of the exhibit and when the juror can get in and when the general public's going to get in, so you know what time that the jurors have by themselves before anybody else is in the hall. Also, I think the biggest thing of any juror is he wants to know when he's going to get fed or she's going to get fed, and which ones are going to be paid for and what I'm going to do for myself. Some cases there's a voucher system where you're given a voucher and you can go out and get whatever you like. And other times it's brought in sandwiches, etc. So whatever the organising committee organises, that's what we run with. And please, as jurors, don't complain about it, because they're doing the best that they can. And sometimes it's a really tight budget. And some of the big national shows have actually made a loss. So you've got to help them where possible. So all the judging sheets will be out there. They'll be pre-printed. They'll have the frame numbers on. They'll have the exhibit name on. And you need to find the judging sheets for your team as team leaders and go out and put them on your desk and then spread them out. So we're still in the beginning part of the jury. We haven't sent anyone out to judging. We're just going through. So straight up front, you're going to say, we've got special prizes. These are the special prizes we've got. Please make a note and then come up with suggestions. If you tell them about the special prizes on the last day and then everyone's rushing around, are they doing justice picking the right exhibitor for those special prizes? If they have it in their mind at the beginning, I think it's very important that they can then look at every exhibit as they're going along, going, look, this may be worthy. I'll just put a mark down here. This may be worthy. Then I'll get back to those two and then do a comparison. So it's having that on every juror's mind as you go through. And make those suggestions. And also you need to look at felicitations and make suggestions for felicitations. Now, it may have already had felicitations for research or material, and the job of the assistant secretary and secretary is to actually inform you, no, we can't do that again. But don't let that stop you. If you think it's deserved felicitations, make the recommendations. Don't forget that there's confidentiality. So you need to say right up front, please don't tell your mate, I think you're going to get the big gong because everyone's talking about your exhibit. Don't say anything. If they're your best mate, you just can't say anything. All right. And that's all the results. And got to remember, there could be challenges and things change. So you've got to tell them, until they're published, nothing goes out. And of course, the favorite one is no visit to the dealers. And you can see the dealers don't like this, and they will come up to you and say, look, don't forget, I've got these special items that I brought in just for you. You need to have a look at them. I'll save them. That I can tolerate, but then wandering off with them and then going to have a look, no, that can't be done. All right. When the jury's dismissed, you'll be told you can go to the dealers, and that's when they get a flurry of income. So the dealers are very much happy about that. Also, if there's some new regulations that you're aware of and you're not too sure, make everyone aware of. You could say the Open Philately, there's new FIP rules. Make sure you're familiar with them. Remember, we're all going to vote for whether these are worth gold or large gold or silver. So please be aware of these guidelines. Even if it means that night you need to get onto the website and have a look, I think that does prompt people. All right. Typically, we used to have a reading of the results. That's sort of gone by the board now. So the results are all printed from our exhibition aid. We do ask the team leaders to sign off on them, and then they get stuck up on the wall. And if there's changes, those ones come down, new ones are signed off and gone back up on the wall. If there is to be any clarification between team leaders, then that needs to be done by a certain time, and you need to indicate where that is. And of course, if two team leaders decide there's going to be a change in the results, then that needs to go back to the jury secretary, and then those results get changed and a new sheet gets put up on the wall. So please be wary that those result sheets will change from time to time, and you should check, as a juror, should be checking on them as you're going along. Of course, the Presidium may propose some exhibits for grant awards. Also, any of the team leaders, and typically in the jury room, we look at, well, who are all the exhibits that's got the highest mark. So it might be in trad, it might be, there's 1 or 2 96s. Maybe in stationery, there's 190 and a 91, and they might be put up. So that's something that you need to consider as a team leader, and that they'll be voting for it in the jury room. But of course, the winner will only be announced at the Palmaris, and nobody will know who that is until that night. All right, preparing for feedback. Always remind people as you're going out there judging, please make the notes of your discussions down on your form. That's what it's there for. So you'll, before you go on to the next exhibit, you're ready to do the feedback. If you leave all the points to at the last minute, you'll be just making a nightmare for the secretary and the assistant secretary trying to get all the feedback forms ready for the feedback day. So team leaders are responsible for appointing the person who's actually going to do the written feedback for each of those exhibits. Apprentices, we then just run through and make all apprentices aware of everything that's going to be done, that they need to be evaluating things by themselves. The team leaders will compare the results. Apprentices will be part of the team probably an hour before the individual judging, and then off they go. You know what it's all about. This is just to refresh the team leaders, what we expect them to do, and B, the poor apprentice, it's their first time in the room. Now they get to see what's going to happen if the team leader hasn't informed them before they've arrived to the show. In FIP, there's jury pins. The APF, we also have jury pins. So if it's a time to be awarded a jury pin, we'll make a point when that's going to be. Typically, we will do it in Australia with signing the roll at the end of the show in the jury room, and then I'll hand the pin over at that stage. If there's an expert team, and this is normally for FIAP and FIP, but we may have one at a large national, then they would say, look, this is what we're looking for. If you've seen covers where cancellations don't look like they've gone on the cover, or if you think something's looked suspicious, you know, so they'll brief you on what they want you to look for as jurors. And you're always got to be on the guard for things that you think might be a little bit suspicious. And then we're still on before we've let them out judging, you know, make sure that you're aware of what time they're going to be judging to on the first day. If there's an opening ceremony, then, you know, make sure there's time to get them there. And then let them know when the next roll call will be. And typically that's the next day. And again, remind them about the photo. So that there runs through just the day one. I mean, and we try to cram a lot in, but pretty much if you do it through PowerPoint, you don't miss any of the things that you need to be discussing. If you're just doing it off a check sheet, and you get sidetracked and all of a sudden people go out judging, they're not aware of what's going on. So I think the power of the PowerPoint is very important. So let's just look at the next day. You're going to have roll call, jury meeting, and then we're going to introduce you to everything. And again, I'm very goal orientated. So today I want everything judged, every first round, because typically we do 2 rounds at a large national. And I want you to constantly be preparing feedback. So just a reminder, so people don't get back in the jury room going, well, I only had 3 revenues, so I'm got it real easy, so I'm just going to sit here and there's always stuff to do, and it's nice to be prompted. Again, you go through what the schedule's going to be, and if there's any reimbursement, the jurors like to know when that's going to happen, and sooner rather than later, but typically it's left to the organising committee to arrange all of that. Preparing the feedback, again, just giving more information about getting ready and who's responsible, etc. And please remember, inform the expert, use the forms, inform class changes. There's a form for that. Inform if the exhibit has changed its title. So when we're going through the exhibitor's application form, they may have had a title change. So we've got to be a bit wary of that. Identify special prizes, identify nominations for felicitations, and team leaders to make sure they get their evaluation of the apprentices done by the end of the day. So that's just a bit of a reminder for everybody about what's going to happen. Again, if there's any questions, we talk about questions. Generally, we tell them when lunch is, because that's another important part, because after 3-4 hours of standing on your feet, it's nice to come back into the jury room and have a bit of lunch. Sometimes that's the only time you've got to discuss, what do you think about this and what do you think about that, and go and talk to other team leaders or other jurors at the time. And then off to go and get our photos. And please be present, because the amount of times that you smile 3 times and you get 3 pictures, and then one more person comes running in. So you go through the whole process again, and then one more other person comes running in. And by the 5th person, you go, no more photos. That's it. You're no longer in the jury photo. So please be on time for those jury photos. It should just be as simple as 5 minutes rearranging, 3 photographs, and we're out of there. So that's what it's all about. And as secretary, I'd be reminding everyone to do that. Again, roll call, typically when is the next meeting, and that's generally at the end of the day. So we would do that. Part of what we do once we get everything back is just, are we on track? You know, so we might say, how are the team leaders going? What about our nationals? How's that looking? What about the trad for Europe, or US, Asia? Whatever teams we got, we'll be just asking those team leaders where we're at. So that gives the chair and the secretary a feel on how we're going for time. And if it means that we're going to say, look, we're doing well, we can get the bus organised for 8 o'clock, or we're really dragging our feet, I'm going to hold the bus back till 9 o'clock to get you everyone to the hotel, then that just gives you an indication on what to do there. Of course, right after the photographs could be reimbursement, sandwiches, whatever. All of that information you can then hand out. Then I'd be talking about the next day. Again, once they've rocked in for the next day, we want to know how we're finishing. And this is typically, we were starting on the 2nd round. We would have done the 1st round. We want to get on to the 2nd round and get everyone to hand their results in, because it's no use judging and then forget to hand the results into the secretary and we got nothing up on the wall. So continue judging. There might be an issue. So here's a good point to put it up. We're going to have the hall lights turned off for half an hour because something's going to be done for basketball the next day, etc. Typically, there's a wedding going on and they're going to want to get all the chairs out. So if there's any housekeeping that needs to be done, then you can keep reminding people of what's happening in these situations. So we'll then check all the results. We'll check for felicitations, and we'll make sure everything's been awarded. Evaluation of apprentices. So now we're going to be letting them know that we need to evaluate the apprentices and the people that are getting cross-accredited, and we'd hand those things into. I'm sorry, I'm just pacing through because I'm just giving you the feel on how the run of the show and how the PowerPoint presentation goes. So we may look at adjustments, and that's where we've gone and looked at that. We may have 3 trad teams. We want to make sure that the large goals for team 1 is the same as the large goal for team 2 as team 3, and we make sure that that's all right. So there may be a bit of final tweaking. We'll then identify the grand awards, and then team leaders will review all the goals and large goals so we can sign off on them. So if there's any questions, we ask them at that time. And if it's getting beer o'clock, most times you get very few questions towards the end. But when you're in the bar, they then start asking, what about this? What about that? So the more you can put on these PowerPoint presentations, the easier it's going to be for you as a secretary. So then you might want to give a bit of a status and update of what's going on. We might want to talk about the last day's schedule. This is what's going to happen, how we're going to do everything. Of course, when we're suggesting the grand awards and when are we going to give the talks on them, etc. When are we going to resolve any adjustments in markets? All these things need to be documented so they're aware that they've got to be done. If there's any changes, then we may make suggestions on what's happening on the PowerPoint. So this PowerPoint is active. You develop it, and then as things happen in the show, you'll be modifying it and then going through it. Felicitations. Then if there's any questions, again, always give time for the jury to ask questions. We'll talk about the next day roll call. If there's any changes that need to be discussed or resolved, then we'll talk about that. We'll go through the schedule again, very schedule oriented, keeping everyone paced, boom, 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 on time, so they know what they're doing and they get on with it. When I spoke about team leaders, and often you only have 10 to 12 minutes for every exhibit to go out, you need to keep that pace up if you want to get everything done by the time we need to print the Palmyras. And then, of course, we're coming up to the grand awards, and we've now got it down to a couple, so we'll let you know what they are. The team leaders might want to have a bit of a chat about it, and often we'll go out and have a look at those. And what I do suggest at this point, saying, please don't every juror go around to one exhibit at the same time, because obviously the exhibitors are typically jurors as well, knowing, oh, I'm in for a grand award because there's 30 jurors all looking at my exhibit. So I try to get you to have a look at different times rather than everyone rush out there to have a look at that. If they're internationals, then there may be a few to look at. We need to review all the goals and large goals, and that's been done. So we've gone through that. Team leaders, if there's any objections, have they all been resolved? Because I want a point where there's no more challenges can be happening. And as you know, we try to have friendly challenges where if it can be done without it becoming a determination by the presidium, then that is a nice way to go. So the big reviews from the team leaders. Special prizes, then we will be mentioning where we think for special prizes. Typically, this is the best one for best traditional, best post or stationery. And if there's possibility of an encouragement award, best first time exhibitor, always like to see if I can find something for those guys to keep them motivated. All other jurors, keep preparing your feedbacks, go to the frames, make all the comments, make notes. Don't just sit in the jury room, all right? Because that frustrates the busy ones. And if you can help someone, why don't you go out there and help someone? I think that's important to motivate those people. Again, give them time to ask questions, tell them when the next roll call on. Then we meet, we have the roll call. We go through our status. As you can see, it's very much the same. So here's the confidential information. We're going to vote on it today. We're going to have the talks. All this information, the votes will be put into an envelope and opened up at the Palmares. Goes through the whole schedule. And as you can see, speeches for the Grand Awards, speeches for the Grand Prix. This is good time at this last time is for the jury medals to be handed out in the jury, because if you add that to the Palmares, it becomes a very long process and they've got a cold dinner in front of them. The people that win awards exhibitors, that's what the Palmares is for, not for the jury, but the jury medals should then be given out just prior to the end of work. Again, any other questions? Final roll call, going through the schedule again. You can see all team leaders need to check all the results. Please sign everything. It's important that you do have a look at those because typos happen. And just check. Go to these frames for before the votes. Now we're going to have the speeches. So that's all going to get done. The expert team's going to read their report if they've got any in the jury room. If we have any objections, then that'll be done. The jury report will be read out by the secretary in the jury room. It also will be read out at the Palmares, but at least everyone's aware of what's going to be done. Voting gets done. Here are the nominations. So it makes it easier and make sure the candidates only 3 to 5 minutes each and talk about the exhibit, not the exhibitor. That's a pretty important one. Then we've got the apprentices to help with the voting. Again, as you can see, the jury medals, practical issues. We'll talk to you about the Palmares. What's going to happen tomorrow? Well, you're allowed to go to the dealers. That's the one where you get a cheer in the jury room. Yeah, everyone rushes out there and does that. But don't forget, you've got to come back tomorrow for the feedback. So we'll have another roll call for that. Feedback to the exhibitors. Typically an hour and a half together with the exhibitors and commissioners to do all the feedback. So, give them a time frame so we can get everything done as best as possible. All the practical issues, when the buses are going to leave for Palmares and all that, you should discuss that. And of course, at the end of it, thank the jury because they're not getting paid. They may get paid to fly their meal and accommodate, but they're doing it for free. A lot of people are working and taking time off their work. So I think it's important to thank everyone. So what you've just seen is a 4-day show all wrapped up in about 15 minutes. So it's not meant to elicit more questions. We've spoken about the roles of the secretary, the chair and the team leaders. This is just the embellishment. This PowerPoint presentation will be put up on the training website. If you want to use it, pull it apart, shrink it down for your own use. Please go ahead and do it. If you've got some good suggestions for this template, please email them to me because it's always improving. So for those that's the end of that session. If you've got any questions on that template or anything else that we've done, happy to answer those. Thank you.
What a remarkable person, this John Smith.
Yeah, I try to be as neutral as possible, but there'll be a John Smith who'll cop all of that next time.
Well, he's actually a typical organised philately person. He's doing everything and wearing many hats. I suppose one way of looking at it.
And he's the head of the organising committee as well.
Doing everything.
Been there.
My brother-in-law.
Just one small thing. I happened to notice it right at the beginning. One of the things that we've now got into the habit of doing in New Zealand is at the introduction of the organising committee chairman, we also bring in the hall manager, because that's somebody that the jury needs to know in terms of if there's issues with the frames and things like that. He's the person that needs to be approached. So just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think anyone that the jury needs to know, I think that's a good time to do it before it starts. I think the organising committee could probably say, yes, we'd like them. And there may be someone else that they need us to see. You know, maybe
the treasurer who pays the bills.
Well, the treasurer, but also the person that opens up and closes down. Because, and, you know, be nice to this person, because you're running late because you're trying to judge 2 more exhibits. They want to go home or have a beer, right? So, you know, I'm happy, but I think the important part is to give that recognition to the organising committee, because, you know, they've done a great job to get us to that point. So is everyone going to use the template? Most people are saying, who wants to be secretary after all that work? And you don't have a secretary, so how easy it is in New Zealand.
We don't have a secretary.
Yes. The chairman does it all, right?
The secretary does it.
Oh.
We've got a person called a secretary, and generally they are very good.
Yeah.
Aren't they?
Their roles are just a little bit different than
exactly. But that's something that we are actually going to have to be thinking about over the next 6 months or so. But yeah, no, that's fine.
So I think technology is changing. PowerPoint's becoming more and more easier to have. Most venues now have either a big overhead screen with that gives you a projector or a large TV. Either way. But if your way is to have butcher paper and put the same notes on, I'm not going to say don't do it. I just think if you've got the facilities to use PowerPoint, keep people on track, and keep the most prominent thing you want on all the time as people are wandering in and out of the jury room. And often that is, when's the next roll call, or when can they go home? You know, anything like that just prompts, you know, the secretary being asked the same question 20 or 30 times.
And I just mentioned, if people don't have PowerPoint, there's an excellent Google lookalike product. If you use Google Docs, it's called Google Slides, and it's online, and you can make your slides up just like PowerPoint. It doesn't cost you anything.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I'll put this up online as PowerPoint, but you can just cut and paste it. I mean, if I can convert it to PDF, then it's not editable for most people, but... Yeah. But I think, yeah, Google Slides, there's a few others as well, and that they'll take PowerPoint presentations and convert them, I think. So,
yep.
Glenn, there's one thing that you tend with an expert team. When you're actually judging, you tend to forget that there are items that need to be referred to the expert team. It's important that they're referred to the experts earlier rather than later. Yep. Otherwise, their work gets later and later. Yep. I think we had a reminder, I don't know if it was in Singapore or somewhere else, where they had nothing for quite a while. So keep your eye open for the doubtful items or things you want looked at, and fill the form in, pass it on as soon as possible.
Yep, good point. Thanks, Norm. All right, well, next session's going to be Ian McMahon's giving us an FIP update. There's a bit that's been happening with harmonisation and websites and a whole range of things. Ian, did you want some of the other commission heads to input on this, or you're happy to run that whole thing yourself? I need your mic on, Ian.
You're on mute, Ian.
I can't unmute him. There you are.
Turn your mic on.
There you are.
Okay, now you can hear me.
Yeah.
At the very least, there are a couple of commission heads who I would like to get some information from as to where they're up to. Malcolm Groom's an obvious one. But yeah, I'll think about it. It may well be that the easiest is to actually get them to come in and talk about what's happening in their commission, such as the Postal History Commission. I can talk about the harmonisation project and mention some of the other changes, such as thematics and revenues. But you know, I might invite Linda to speak briefly on the current thematic rules and Carol on the changes to propose to revenues.
I know that. I'll text him straight away.
It's about as up to date as my left testicle.
Yeah.
Pardon?
No. Tell it.
I'm happy to do that.
No.
Thanks, Linda. All right, so I'll get Ian to email those people for that next session. Yeah. Again, apologies to New Zealand for missing your daylight saving. It'll be back on 7 o'clock in 2 weeks' time. Of course, the East Coast, except for Queensland and Western Australia, will go to daylight saving, so your time will be fine. So I'll be earlier, and Bernie and Queensland will be an hour earlier. So hopefully that doesn't cause too much inconvenience. So is there any other questions about anything that you would like us to discuss?
Thank you for another good session. And Bernie and others.
Look, Tim, thanks for turning up, because these training courses are no good when you're just staring at your own face.
I had enough trying to do training sessions face to face, let alone on virtually. I've done a few of them over the last few weeks, and it's not pleasant.
Yeah, look, I have to thank COVID, because this has allowed us to do this. We've been working on this and trying to work out how to put it into 2 exhibitions, or whether the APF needed to fund, partially fund it on a weekend like we do with jury training courses. So this has worked out very well. The recordings make it easier, and as I say, I'll be speaking about this success of this at the next FIAP meeting, and everyone has access to the APF website. So I encourage any of those FIAP members to make use of the Zoom meetings that we've had. So thank you.
One thing that does help us is the fact that most of us, I think, around the table, as it were, are familiar with each other.
Yep.
We've met each other, whereas I think getting new judges involved in something like this might be something slightly different. So we have to keep that in mind, because I think round the table is quite different. Yeah,
and I think if we're trying to get the next round of judges, you need 2 full days. Like you break this type of session, you don't quite get your head around. You might just talk about importance, and then 2 weeks later you've forgotten what that was. So I agree that, and on initial new judges, when we're looking for new apprentices, that should be face to face. The problem we're going to have here in Australia and New Zealand is who are the next lot of exhibitors that are stepping up for the mark, that we can run another course. And say, unfortunately, we've been losing international judges through death, and that's unfortunately a common occurrence. If we don't keep planning over the next 10 years to get other people involved, then this could all just dry up overnight. So it's one of those things that I'm actively always talking about, and with our relationship with NZPF, I think we've been doing the same on our meetings as well. So it's been good. No, and you're all good blokes, and I really appreciate it. And when I say blokes, I don't mean male, I mean people. So I haven't found a non-genetic word that I'm comfortable using for everyone. So please just accept that. So, All right, I'm going to stop the recording. Anyone, more than welcome to stay.